You can find full interviews on the Tell Us About channel, link in the description. Overall, I think everyone thinks that there's this thing called common sense. That's like the shared thing. But I don't believe in that concept. I think there's a concept called perceived common sense. But there's actually no such thing as common sense. Each person has their own experiences, which shapes what they expect in whatever situation. And then we tend to always think that everyone has the same background as us and just thinks the same things as us. Did you notice that at all?
Yeah, and the thing that I always come back to time and time again as something that I took for granted. I took it for granted playing Path of Exile, and I took it for granted playing World of Warcraft, is being able to analyze a situation and being able to look at it not from a perspective of this sucks, the game is stupid, but even if the game is stupid and even if it does suck, what can I do differently to
Mm-hmm.
prevent that from happening? It is a mandatory skill to be a top player in anything. And for a long time, because I was that top player, and a lot of my friends, a majority of my friends were also those top players, be it in Path of Exile or World of Warcraft or even RuneScape. I took for granted that I was always doing that and that not everyone else does. It wasn't until I started making content that I started to see how many people don't do that because they've never had to.
Mm-hmm. I think I've always looked at it like that, but I grew up playing Warcraft and Starcraft and stuff, and a lot of 1v1
Yeah.
things. And I think chess is another thing. I played a lot of chess. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like there are things that you could do and you clearly did something wrong. So I've always had that mindset of like, what can I do better as well? But yeah, there's that. And then there's also the other concept of like it's a spatial awareness thing or a timing awareness. Like so many people in World of Warcraft had problems remembering what the boss is going to do next. And it's literally a sequence that repeats itself. He does 4 moves and he does this one, and then slightly different. He does this move next, and then he does this one, and then this one. And it would surprise them almost every time, and I have no idea why.
It's
That's a different thing than what you're talking
it's a
about, but
different thing, but also related. And
yeah.
if you look at boss design, I think it's why I find a lot of games so easy these days, because I've noticed a lot of games use a 3-move pattern for their bosses, and older games used 4, 5, or even 6-move patterns. Those are harder to remember, and part of it is people just aren't used to thinking that way. If every game they play, they probably never noticed the fact that every boss they fought had only 3 moves. But subconsciously, it got ingrained in them that bosses have 3 moves. One of those silent, understood rules. And so when they play a game where the boss has 4, 5, 6, all of a sudden, they're caught off guard. And another good example of this is Path of Exile does its bosses differently than a lot of other games. That a lot of what is dangerous in a Path of Exile boss, the cue to tell you is the boss saying a voice line. It is the boss says a voice line, and then something scary appears on your screen, but it is probably too late to dodge if you're dodging based solely on the visual. If you dodge when you hear the voice line or when you see it in the chat, you're able to avoid things much more easily, and you have much more leeway for mistakes. Older games do this. Games that are 10, 20 years old do this. Modern games have gone with red circles, I think because red circles are easier, and there are games like Final Fantasy XIV that use their red circles very well. There are other games where they use their red circles very poorly because you're introduced to them early on, but they don't really mean anything because the early game is so easy that you can't die. Or maybe you can, but you have to go out of your way. You have to really go out of your way to die. So you're introduced to, oh, some moves have circles. Then you're introduced to, circles don't mean much. Then you're introduced to, yeah, but also there's now 8 circles and each of them one-shots you. Good luck. And all of a sudden you have a really poor preparation, that there's a lot of consistency in terms of Path of Exile with some mechanics. There's also wild inconsistency with others that should be corrected, but slams, no matter what is doing it, a slam in PoE is all the same. They're all really long animations. Like Phoenix's Explosion is a slam, Shaper slam, the most iconic slam. And they are almost all going to kill you unless you outgive a fight to the point where it is trivial. You know that it is a slam move when it is super slow and it kills you. And so it's easier to avoid them all because the concept is consistent across multiple bosses.
This was just a taste of what you can find in a full interview here, or the link in the description.